Hey folks, welcome to today's video. Today I want to talk to you about shelters. Natural shelters and then shelters made with something you brought with you, like a tarp or something like that. And just the different instances where you would use one over the other. It's a pretty nice day out today. It's warmer than normal, kinda. It's about 20 something. We've got a brisk wind. We've got gusts probably up. I would say the gusts are approaching 40 miles an hour right now. It's snowing. It's supposed to get a few inches anyway. I've got a natural shelter that I'm going to show you that I built, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago when I was practicing. I thought I might be in a tropical environment. So I was practicing using all natural materials, no cordage. And then I brought a couple tarps out here to show you the way I would set up a tarp if I really needed one. Okay, this shelter behind me, like I said, I made 3 or 4 years ago at least. Made it all out of all natural materials, no cordage. It was during the, I believe, early summer. And like I said, this is a shelter that I was practicing for a tropical environment. You can see I've got a raised bed, and then I had a roof over the top of that. The roof has sagged. Actually, this is the first time I've come out here and seen this roof sag like this. It's been pretty steady. So, this shelter, you can see how much materials this took for me to chop down. I used a cold steel kukure, and I want to say it took me 6 to 7 hours to make this shelter. Now, I made this shelter for 2 people, so I could have went with something a little bit smaller, but like I said, that's something that I was experimenting with. I've done debris shelters. They take a while too. They don't take 7 hours, but they definitely take a while. These natural shelters that you see folks make take a long time. As far as I'm concerned, they're not survival shelters. They're bushcraft shelters. They may be long, they're long-term type shelters. You might say wilderness living. Depends on the shelter. This isn't something that you're gonna whip up when it's 20 minutes to dark and you freaked out because you're lost. This is something that you start in the morning and maybe add to as days progress. Survival shelters for me is something that's going to take a half hour or less, at the most a half an hour or less. You're not going to get lost, or at least you're not going to admit to yourself that you're lost at 9 o'clock in the morning. If you get lost at 9 o'clock in the morning, most people are going to sit there and screw around all day until they try and, and try to self-rescue or try to get out. Or even if you just waited around, your first thought isn't going to probably be to make a debris shelter, unless things are just really out of hand and you're really a hurting unit. But if you take a look around my area right now, I've got at least 3 inches of very crusty, icy snow. We had some good snow, we had some really cold weather, it melted, and then it froze again. I could probably find some debris out here, but it would definitely take a long time. If I had, I've got a creek right over there to the east of me. If I were to go kick some snow off, I'd be able to harvest some swamp grass. I've done videos on that where I've made really nice beds out of that swamp grass. You could do the same thing with thatching your roof with that swamp grass. There's a lot of things you can do. It just depends on how much time you have and what did you bring with you. If you didn't bring anything with you, well, you better start chopping down some trees and start trying to make some sort of a windbreak or something on a day like today. You can hear the wind really whistling. The trees are just I just kind of want to throw that out there. There's a lot of talk about these emergency survival shelters, and you see everybody making debris huts, and you see all these awesome, wonderful natural shelters, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But just keep in mind how much time that takes, and if you're a hurting unit, you need a shelter now. And especially if you screwed around and didn't start building your shelter till maybe an hour before dark, half hour before dark. You still got to get all your wood for the night, stuff like that. So you want something you can deploy quite quickly, and these natural shelters you're not going to deploy very quickly. Now that is of course area dependent. In my area, I could chop down some of these birch trees, maybe split some birch bark, make shingles. I mean, it's all doable. It's just how much time and how much equipment did you bring with you. And just realize that if you want to go out all natural and primitive and stuff, it's going to take you a while to make yourself a shelter. Whereas if you just pack a tarp and a little bit of cordage, you can have a shelter up in about 10 minutes probably. So, all right, I'll give you a little tour around this shelter. This is all friction fit. Put a little post under there. It held me and my son together. My son probably weighs about 230 pounds. I weigh about $170. So it definitely held up. You can see I got some support poles here. I got my equipment right there. There's the roof really sagging now. There's the ridge pole for the roof. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do with trying to figure out where I want to place my shelter is figure out which way the wind's blowing. I'm familiar with my area. I'm familiar with which way the wind normally blows. It normally blows out of the north or northwest. Today it's blowing out of the south, maybe a little bit southwest. So you have to kind of keep in mind that even though the wind blows a certain way, 9 times out of 10 or whatever, you get that odd day like today where it's blowing kind of out of the opposite direction. I've got a big old oak tree right here, and I've got a small little maple tree that'll work for a ridge line. I don't have to have a ridge line. I can just tie this tarp to a tree if I wanted to. It's not a big deal, but I want to go ahead and use a ridge line. It gives me more versatility with my shelter. If I set my shelter up with the opening facing me, and all of a sudden the wind shifts in the middle of the night, I can pull a couple of toggles and shift it down the opposite direction. Basically, I've got almost 360 degrees. Not quite, but almost 360 degrees of where I can set this shelter up. There's a couple spots I can't do it just because of the base of the big oak tree and stuff, but this will work. Alright, well this is just a basic plow point shelter. You've seen it before. I don't particularly like lean-to type shelters unless it's in the dead of summer or something. I live in a very windy environment and the wind will rob the warmth from you really, really fast. So I want as much of a windbreak as possible. I set the arc or the incline of this plow point a little too steep for this particular tarp. It makes it all wonky. First of all, it's a, what is it, like a 5x7 or something. So it's not perfectly square. It's going to be a little bit funky anyway. But I like to make the incline a little bit taller than most folks in the wintertime. That's what I like to do. Just simply because if you make the incline of your plow point too not steep enough, you're not going to have enough room when you put your browse bed down between the browse bed and the tarp. The tarp's going to rub up against you basically no matter what, because this isn't a very big tarp. It's just, it is what it is. But if you incline the plow point a little bit more, you have a little more space back here that you can put your debris bed. And you know, you're looking at 4 to 6 inches minimum. I would say closer to 6, compressed, for you to be insulated between the ground and yourself. And of course I would try to kick away as much of the snow underneath here as possible. You're not going to get it perfectly clean. That's what your browse bed's for. I'm going to show you a little, now this way I would, like I said, I'd be relying on a browse bed. I could definitely have a fire out here in front of me. I don't really have too much to worry about with my ridge line. The way I have it positioned, I do actually have to be just a little bit careful. I wouldn't have my fire quite that close anyway, but you always got to watch out for your ridge line. Make sure you don't melt it above the fire. That's another reason why if you see a lot of folks, they'll make a lean-to or a plow point, and then at the very end they angle it down, the tarp down a little bit. And the theory with that is that the air and the warm air currents will sit there and circulate and bounce off of that little awning part and back towards you. That's a great theory and a great idea and stuff. The problem is that most times you need to make like a lean-to configuration with that, unless you want to make your little awning out of natural debris. And if you know, you have to make a lean-to, so well, now your sides are open, that little bit of heat's going to be gone anyway. I much prefer a plow point like this, or something with wing walls. I'm going to set this up a little bit less steep, so you can see that maybe if you didn't need quite as big a brow bed, you could maybe spread out a little bit more in here. Here's the same shelter configuration. I just lowered the pitch of the ridge line, lowered the pitch of the tarp. There's a little bit more side to side room now, but it's a little bit tighter down in here. You can see I don't fit in quite as good anymore, but that's all right. It'll hold a little bit more heat in, but once again, you just need to make sure you got enough room for your browse bed. It looks like I would have enough in here. So another thing that I've done on this one is I've taken a couple of logs and I've pushed them to the sides of the tarp. What that does is it kind of billows the tarp open a little bit. The logs push the sides out, and I did that in Vancouver Island just to kind of give me a stable platform down at the base of my tarp, and then also it increases the amount of area that you have inside there. Now I could just take some snow from the outside and just scrape it along that tarp and make like a windproof seal there. I still do have enough room for my browse bed in there. It'll be a little bit tighter, but I think I still have room. It'd keep the heat in a little bit more. But with this ridge line, you really have a lot of versatility. And this kind of goes back into what are you going to carry? What are you taking with you on a hike? I know I had to manufacture stakes out here. I was actually really surprised that the stakes drove in. We've had some thawing weather, so the ground's not froze now, but it was froze pretty good. But are you going to carry stakes with you? How much cordage are you going to take? Do you have any type of tarp material at all? Did you only pack a grocery bag? Not a grocery bag, a trash bag. These are the things you got to look at when you're thinking about practicing. I like to practice all different things just in case, you never know. But I like to carry my gear too. And sure, you can whip out stakes, you can whip out, I suppose even a ridge line from cordage. I've made quite a bit of cordage. But how much time do you have, and how much time do you want to screw around with your shelter? If it's an emergency kit, it should go up pretty darn fast. You shouldn't be going out in the woods thinking, well, it's going to start raining, it's pouring down rain, I'm lost, I'll make a debris hut. It ain't going to work. It may work, but you got a lot of work ahead of you. So, all right, this was all basic stuff. If you want to carry this or my next tarp setup. Here's another configuration with a different tarp. The only thing really different about this is I now have a moisture barrier between the snow and myself. If I did not have a trash bag, I would pile the debris under this oilskin as much as I possibly could, just stuff it like we talked about 6 inches thick. And then I could put this moisture barrier over the top of the grass or whatever I happen to use, and then it will protect me from moisture. Obviously, it's a moisture barrier. Oilskin will transfer moisture if you push it, if you kneel on the oilskin and there's a puddle or something there, it will transfer moisture, but for the most part it's waterproof. This is a 10 by 10 oilskin from tentsmiths.com. Generally I like Tentsmiths products. I just got this for Christmas. I'm wearing their watch coat. Like I said, in general I like their stuff. On their website it says that they're 10 by 10, I think it says on there 10 by 9.6. Well, my tarp's about 9.2 by about 9.6, so if you're concerned about that, I think I'd call them and say, hey, exactly what dimensions is my tarp going to come. It's only 10 inches different, but I paid for a 10 by 10. I was kind of hoping for a 10 by 10, but it is what it is. Whatever, it's a good quality product. I like it. I went ahead and did the same thing with this plow point as I did with the emergency space blanket, except now I have a floor. Like I said, I went ahead and stuffed the pieces of wood into the corners and along the sides of this tarp to try to billow it out more. Something I've done, I do quite often actually, is when I'm setting up a plow point like this, if I don't want to take the time, or even if I do want to take the time and use the tie outs on the back, put a tie out with another line, billow out the back, pull the back out, give you a little bit more room back here. But what I've done in the past is I've taken my pack and just shoved it back in there, and that will billow out your tarp as well. So you can see this one's I got quite a bit more room in here. It's doing a great job as far as wind protection, windbreak, stuff like that. I want to show you one thing that I see a lot of people do, and every time I see it, it's just a horrible pet peeve of mine, because I know they're going to get wet if they actually stay out when it rains. Let me set the camera up and I'll show you. So one thing I see a ton of people doing is they will extend their ground cloth out past their tarp roof structure. And here it might not be that big a deal because I'm basically, this little corner is on a decline here, so the water's going to run off. But you can imagine if there's even just a little bit of a hill or something, this is going to run that water right back towards you. You can't have that. You have to have your ground cloth tucked up inside of your roof line. One other neat thing about this ground cloth like this is if it did all of a sudden start turning really bad, I could really tuck up into the back of this and then pull that ground cloth over the top of me. My buddy George showed me this shelter. It's just with this particular tarp with the tie outs on the back and stuff, you can make this plow point like this. Very similar to when folks do it with the lean-to and the ground cloth. But anyway, I like this, and especially with this size tarp. That 8x8 was just a little bit too small for me. I seemed to rub between side to side when I stretched out, and I'm not that big of a guy. I'm only about 5'9". So this one gives me a little bit extra room. I think it weighs 5 pounds 9 ounces, something like that. I wouldn't consider it a survival shelter, but it's definitely a good product even in the cold. I have a nice long fire out in front of here. This oilskin will get burn marks in it. My other one I actually had to repair a couple times, but it's not bad, and it's certainly not as bad as like Silnai tarps or those cheap blue tarps you get like at Walmart or whatever. If an ember pops on it, it usually goes out. It's only the big hardcore embers that'll burn a hole through your tarp. So here's a tarp configuration that I've just been messing with a little bit. Just a couple toggles up top. Kind of started off with a lean-to, and then you got a couple of wing walls, and it kind of makes a little bit of an enclosure like a plow point. You still have your vapor barrier or moisture barrier down at the bottom. One thing I wanted to show you guys here real quick, because I've had to do this before. If the ground is too frozen, you run your guy lines or your lines off your tarp to a piece of wood, or obviously a tree or something. But if you can't drive a stake into the ground, there's a few things you can do, and especially in the snow, you can make like a snow anchor, which is basically dig down in the snow, bury your line around a piece of wood or something, and then pack the snow back over it. You need a little bit more snow than what we have here, but I think I could make it work. But anyway, I just want to try this one out. This one works okay. Definitely keep the wind off you. What I'm worried about is how much heat is going to escape out the top, but that's alright. If I needed to increase the angle of this tarp, because maybe it started raining, or the pitch is a pretty steep pitch here, I could always just remove a couple of the stakes. I wouldn't have as much moisture barrier on the bottom, but just remove a couple of the stakes and push it out a little bit further. This is, you can tell here, there's the line of loops, the tie-out loops on the back of this tarp, and I'm actually staked off to one of those. So if I went and extended this tarp further out, the pitch would decrease, and I'd have more area to tuck up inside my tarp here. Once again, I could make a little bit more room by pulling this out. It's not too bad the way it is now. Alright, the only thing left is to start a fire and see what the temperature's like inside of it. Alright folks, well, I just wanted to come out here and do this video just to kind of have a little bit of a discussion regarding bushcraft shelters and emergency survival type shelters, and just how different I personally feel they are. If you can't set your shelter up in for sure a half an hour, it's not a survival shelter. It's a bushcraft type shelter, or a plane in the woods type shelter, a fort you might say. Sure, your fort will keep you warm and shed water and stuff like that, but it's not. All knowledge is good, all knowledge is valuable. It's good to be able to know how to make natural shelters quickly and easily, but they are not near as quick and as easy as a tarp, and that's probably obvious. But on the other hand, I see a lot of folks posting about their survival shelters, and they're these pretty elaborate forts that they've made. and that's great, you know. It takes you a long time to make them, and something like this, just carrying something like this will definitely come in handy if you need it. It's very area dependent. I don't really have any evergreens in my area. I've got a whole lot of straight sticks that would take me quite a while to manufacture a shelter. I am going to be delving into more bushcrafty type emergency shelters, quickie emergency shelters. I just didn't have the time to do it today. And just keep in mind, if you're going to make a snow fort or something out here, you know, do you have a shovel with you? You know, what's your snow like? Is it sugar snow or is it heavy wet snow? Are you going to have a fire? Is that snow on your roof going to start leaking into your shelter? These are just different things to consider. So, alright guys, I'm going to let this fire kick up a little bit, and then I've got my thermometer inside my shelter, so it's right around 20, something like that outside, and I want to see what it's like inside my shelter. I went ahead and changed up my shelter back to the plow point. I didn't like that other shelter. It was okay, you know, it worked, but I much prefer the plow point. That's my favorite type of shelters. Alright guys, well, I'm going to play around with my Christmas present for a little bit longer. My mom is out here with me. She gave me this for Christmas, so alright guys, hope you liked the video. Take care.